She was never the one anyone noticed, until her music made the entire school fall silent. No lyrics, no spotlight, just a song that let everyone hear her heart. At the last row by the window in the sophomore math class at Rivergate Middle School in West Haven, Indiana, 13-year-old Lani Carter sat quietly, just like she did every day. Her hair was neatly braided, her eyes always lowered to her notebook, and between her knees rested an old violin case, as if it was the last precious thing she had left intact. No one paid attention to Lani, and she didn't need them to. Silence had become the invisible coat she wore each day to shield herself from stares, sneers, and whispered jokes. But even though no one said it aloud, everyone knew about the skinny black girl who always carried an old violin but had never once been heard playing it. Lani lived with her mother, Melissa, and her 6-year-old brother, Ryan, in apartment 304 of a dark red brick building on the 3rd floor. There, the sound of ambulance sirens was familiar. The stairwell always smelled like reheated food, and dust never seemed to go away. Their life wasn't luxurious, but it was enough. Enough for Lani to have a small corner to call her own, where her music could breathe. That violin, scratched wood and loose pegs, was a gift from her grandfather, the man who had taught her play when she was just 7, before he passed away from heart failure. When you don't know how to speak with words, he used to say, "Let your music speak for you." Lani didn't play the violin to stand out. She played because it was the only way she felt like herself, when her fingers danced across the strings, when melodies filled a cramped room, when it was just her and the sound. Every afternoon after school, she came home, dropped her backpack, closed the bedroom door, and opened the case. No TV, no social media, no noise, just her violin, a thick towel stuffed under the door to keep neighbors from knocking, and the sound spilling out like a river breaking through after being dammed for too long. No one at school knew she practiced for hours until her fingertips bled, or that her mother, despite working cleaning jobs into the early hours, still listened to the wall, tapping 3 times gently whenever Lani lost her rhythm. That was Lani Carter, a 13-year-old girl living in a world few ever noticed, until the day they were forced to listen. The 5th period in room 204, taught by Ms. Emma, the substitute PE teacher doubling as the school's talent show coordinator, began with her half-joking voice ringing through the classroom. "Okay, folks, still got room for a few more acts. If you can sing, dance, tell a joke, or, I don't know, play the nose flute, go ahead and sign up." The class erupted in laughter. Chairs scraped the floor, and a few names were shouted out in jest. Lani Carter, seated in her usual spot at the back near the window, said nothing. The old violin case rested between her knees, and her hand gently gripped the neck of the instrument in a quiet, familiar gesture of self-protection. "What about our little violinist back there?" Ms. Emma's voice rose slightly, more than playful now, a bit too pointed. She glanced at Lani, then turned toward Mr. Joseph, the science teacher who happened to be sitting in that day. "She's been carrying that music box all year, but she's really good." Lani didn't even get a chance to respond before laughter broke out from the middle rows. "Careful with our ears, Miss Emma," someone shouted, and another voice mimicked the screeching sound of a snapped violin string. No one thought she heard it all, but she did, and she felt it. The teasing didn't sting right away, but it lingered like a paper cut, small but sharp. "What do you think, Lani?" Ms. Emma was still smiling, thinking she was encouraging. "You brave enough to get on stage? Or just planning to be a prop with that violin of yours?" No one expected her to answer. A few kids had already turned away, snickering. But Lani lifted her head, not to look at anyone, but to focus on the board in front of her. "I'll perform," she said. Her voice was steady and soft, like a prayer whispered inside an empty church. The room fell silent. Ms. Emma blinked. Really?" Lani nodded, placed the violin gently beside her, and picked up her pen to sign the list being passed around. No explanations. No need for anyone to believe her. No one laughed now, but it wasn't out of guilt. It was because they didn't know what to do when someone didn't shrink from their ridicule. And Ms. Emma just pressed her lips together. As for Lani, she quietly returned to her seat, her hand resting once again on her violin case, as if to anchor herself to the one thing she was certain of. Music was her voice. And this time, she was going to let them hear it. No one truly believed that Lani Carter would take the stage. By Friday, the official sign-up list was posted on the bulletin board near the main office, right next to the old vending machine no one could remember ever working. A group of students gathered around it like ants swarming a piece of candy. They scanned the list, murmuring familiar names. A girl singing R&B, a pair of twins doing a TikTok dance, a boy performing magic tricks, until they got to entry number 12. Lani Carter. Violin. Original piece. No one said anything right away, as if they'd just seen a ghost. Then someone broke the silence. That's got to be a mistake. Nope, another replied. I saw her write it down herself. Probably going to play Happy Birthday and cry halfway through. Someone else sneered. The laughter spread quickly, like oil on water. But when Lani walked past the crowd, head up, eyes forward, not dodging a single glance, some of those smiles started to fade. She walked like she hadn't heard a thing, but everyone knew she'd heard it all. And it was that silence, that strange and steady silence, that made people uneasy. It wasn't the silence of someone afraid. It was the silence of something forming just behind the fog, uncertain whether it would break as a storm or shine like light. From the moment she signed her name, the air in the school hallways seemed to shift. The squeak of sneakers against the floor was still there. The lingering scent of cafeteria food still clung to walls. But in the eyes of those who looked at Lani, something had changed. She was no longer just the weird girl with the old violin. Now she was the girl who actually dared. Ms. Emma happened to spot Lani tuning her violin behind the school during lunch. She was about to say something, but the look in Lani's eyes made her pause. It wasn't defiant. It wasn't afraid. Just a calm, unreadable gaze that somehow said, "Don't underestimate me." In the teacher's lounge, Mr. Jordan, the music teacher, nodded when he heard her name come up. Lani Carter. Huh? I heard she used to practice with her grandfather at the old St. Mary's Church. If that's true, y'all better brace yourselves. No one said it out loud, but the whole school began to wait, not because they believed in her, but because, for the first time, they were curious if they might have been wrong about someone. Apartment 304, at the end of the third-floor hallway, always smelled like fabric softener and instant noodles. That's where Lani Carter returned every afternoon, just as quietly as she left school. There was no TV noise, no laughter echoing off the walls. Just the soft click of her old violin case opening and the slow, precise tightening of strings to pitch-perfect notes. The violin, dark, scratched, worn, had once belonged to her grandfather, Mr. Isaiah, who played blues at small church gatherings across West Haven, Indiana, for 2 decades. Before he passed from lung cancer, he placed a violin into his 7-year-old granddaughter's hands and told her, "When you can't speak, let this speak for you." Lani still remembered his eyes that day, tired, but filled with trust. Her mother, Melissa, worked as a janitor at a law office downtown. She usually came home well past midnight, her body aching, hands reeking of bleach and cleaning solution. But before she left each evening, she always stopped by Lani's room, laid a warm cloth on her desk, and said, "Don't overdo it. Don't ruin your hands before Friday." Lani would just nod, but she never did take it easy. She practiced until her fingers went numb, until red string marks burned across her palms, and the bow shed its hairs like falling strands. She never complained, because the piece she was preparing wasn't just a performance. It was a memory, a cry held back too long, a sadness too deep for words, and the echo of her grandfather's voice still singing in her chest. Her 6-year-old brother, Ryan, often sat in the doorway, chin on his knees, wide-eyed and silent as he watched her play. "Why don't you play happy music?" he asked one evening, as Lani drew out notes so heavy they sounded like tears flowing backward. "I am playing happy music," Lani replied, never pausing her bow. "It sounds sad." "Sometimes," she said softly, her voice like a violin string just beginning to hum. "Sad is part happy, too." The room was small, its paint peeling and the yellow light dim, but in that moment, it became a stage of its own, a private theater where only Lani, her violin, and her dream existed, not to be pitted, but to be truly heard. Late at night, She hadn't gone to bed yet. She sat by the window, her shadow cast on the floor by the glow of the street lamp outside. Ryan was already fast asleep beneath a thin blanket, still clutching his worn-out stuffed dinosaur. Her mother, Melissa, stepped out of the bathroom, hair damp, eyes red with exhaustion. "Are you sure about this, Lani?" Lani nodded. "I'm not doing it for them." "Then who for?" She gripped the bow a little tighter in her hand. "For me, because I want to know if I have something worth hearing." Her mother didn't say anything more. She just sat beside Lani, wrapping an arm around her. And in that brief moment, the pressure, the whispers, the bets being made, it all disappeared inside the warm silence of unconditional love. Friday afternoon, the gymnasium at Rivergate Middle School was packed with students and teachers. Plastic chairs creaked under the weight of 100 bodies. The air smelled of old basketballs and floor cleaner. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead, reflecting off the makeshift stage with its faded blue curtain. Act 16 had just finished, a hip-hop dance group that got a few polite claps and scattered whistles. Then Vice Principal Martinez stepped up to the mic, his voice a little awkward. "Next up we have, Lani Carter with a violin performance." A few half-hearted whistles echoed, some snickers from the back row. An eighth grader muttered, "Get ready to bleed, people." Phones were already out, ready to capture what they hoped would be an embarrassing moment. Lani walked out from behind the curtain, white button-down shirt, dark jeans, hair neatly tied back, holding her battered violin and a bow worn to its core. She didn't look at anyone, didn't bow. She simply walked to the center of the stage and stood there, feet planted like the roots of a young tree, refusing to bend. No mic, no introduction, no spotlight, just a girl and her violin. And then she drew the bow. The first note was so faint it could have been mistaken for wind brushing the school's rooftop, but it spread slowly, cautiously, like it was feeling its way through darkness, searching for a path. Each note soft, sad, and tenderly shaped with practiced fingers. Midway through the piece, the atmosphere shifted. The violin's voice grew urgent, wild, like footsteps fleeing from something that couldn't be named. Lani kept her eyes closed, her back gently curved with the trembling rise of the strings. She wasn't performing. She was telling a story, not with words, but with loneliness, with bravery, and a desperate longing to be heard. When she drew the final note, a long, pure sound, like a silver thread suspended in air, the entire gym seemed to hold its breath. And then came the applause. At first, it started from the back of the room. Then slowly, it spread, one pair of hands, then another, until the sound rippled through the crowd. Not the polite kind of applause, but something genuine. A teacher wiped away a tear. A group of students who had placed bets sat staring at one another, stunned, as if unsure what they'd just witnessed. On stage, Lani stood still. She didn't bow. She didn't smile. She simply held her violin close to her chest, like she was holding a piece of her soul. And then she stepped away from the light, leaving behind a room that fell silent, then erupted in awe. When Monday came, the halls of Rivergate Middle School were just as crowded as ever. But something had changed, not on the walls or in the morning announcements, but in the eyes of the people who used to pass by Lani Carter like she didn't exist. She walked into the main lobby, the violin still in its worn canvas case slung across her back, just like every other day. But the stares that followed her weren't full of disdain or indifference anymore. A few older students nodded as she passed. A group of girls eating breakfast in the corner stopped chewing, pointed her way, and whispered, this time without laughter. Lani's expression stayed calm. She was still the same. It was a world around her that had shifted. Inside the music room, Mr. Jordan, the teacher who once cracked jokes at her expense in front of class, was hunched over his papers. When Lani passed by, he looked up, suddenly remembering. "Ah, Carter." She turned, silent. "Your performance on Friday, it was, outstanding." He scratched his head, covering the awkwardness with a cough. "I didn't expect, thank you for sharing that talent with the school." Lani gave a small nod. No word were needed. Her silence, now, carried more weight than any polite reply ever could. As she left the room, Ms. Emma, the gym teacher who had led the teasing just a week before, stood by the staff room door, holding her lesson plan. She watched Lani for a long moment before speaking. "Lani, maybe I was wrong to judge you." Lani tilted her head, waiting. "I don't know what's going on in your life, and I shouldn't have made assumptions based on your silence." Lani replied, not bitter, not cold, just truthful. "I've always been here. You just didn't see me." A stillness hung in the air. Ms. Emma swallowed whatever defense she'd been about to offer and simply nodded. Maybe, for the first time, she was truly listening. In the cafeteria during lunch, Lani chose an empty table, just like she always did. But this time Marcus, the boy who played piano in a music club, walked over and set his lunch tray down across from her. "Mind if I sit here?" he asked. She looked up, then slid over to make room beside her. Marcus smiled. "Next time you perform, can I be the one to play backup?" Lani didn't say anything, but the corner of her mouth curved up ever so slightly. Just a little, but enough for the whole room to notice. The quiet girl had finally been seen. In the days following performance, life at Rivergate Middle School went on as usual. Bells rang on time. Homework piled up. Laughter and whispers still drifted down the halls. But somewhere, something small had changed. Not every look had softened. There were still whispers behind Lani's back as she walked past the lockers. Some people still pretended not to see her, like the talent show had never happened. But to a few, to the ones who actually saw, actually listened, she was no longer the weird girl with the old violin. She was Lani Carter, the girl who stood before the whole school and let music speak for her. By the library window, Lani's usual quiet spot, a few more students had begun to show up, not to ask for autographs, not to pester her with questions. They simply sat nearby, sometimes to study, sometimes just to listen to her quietly practice a few notes when the room was empty. No one said much, but their presence was a gentle answer. "I see you." During Tuesday afternoon's music class, Ms. Maya Taylor, the teacher who rarely spoke to Lani, approached her during break. "The piece you played, have you given a name yet?" she asked. Lani shook her head. "You should think of one," Ms. Taylor suggested. "Or not. If you're willing, we could enter it into next month's citywide composition contest." Lani looked up, a flicker of surprise clearly in her eyes for the first time. "Only if you're ready," Ms. Taylor smiled. No pressure. That afternoon, on the walk to the bus stop, Marcus walked beside Lani the whole way. "You know," he said, "I meant to record your performance the other day, but once you started playing, I forgot to hit record. I don't know why. I just wanted to listen." Lani didn't reply, but a small, genuine smile passed across her lips, honest as the first spring breeze in March. Not flashy, but enough to stir something. Maybe the whole school wouldn't change. Maybe most people would still pass her by without noticing. But a few glances had softened. A few people had paused to listen, really listen, and that, all on its own, was a beginning. That evening, after finishing her homework and helping her mother clean the kitchen, Lani Carter sat alone by the window, her violin resting quietly on her lap. The last light of the day streamed through the dusty glass, casting broken beams across the worn wooden floor. Ryan, her little brother, had already fallen asleep in the other room, tucked under his superhero blanket. The apartment was quiet in a way that felt familiar, like a melody played softly after the final note. Lani drew the bow from its case and gently pulled a low note, deep and round, like the sigh of a soul finally set free. She wasn't practicing for a competition, or for anyone who might be watching. She played for herself. Not to prove anything, but to remind herself that she was never invisible, even when others tried to make her believe she was. At school, the name Lani Carter began to carry weight, not because of fame, but because of what she had shown. Her silence, once seen as a sign of weakness, was now viewed differently, as control, as quiet strength. People no longer use words like weird or different to describe her. Now they said things like brave, impressive, and even real. In a language arts class, Ms. Monroe assigned an essay with the prompt, "A moment that helped you understand yourself better." Lani didn't write much, just a single page, but every line landed like a pebble dropped in still water. I used to think being silent was the only way not to get hurt, but I realized silence can also be a way to stand firm when words stop meaning anything. Not everyone needs to shout to be heard. Sometimes, just having the courage to speak in your own way is enough. Ms. Monroe wrote a single red line beneath the essay. Thank you for sharing. You don't have to say much to make people listen. That night, sitting beside her mother on their threadbare sofa, Lani rested her head on her mother's shoulder. I think I'm starting to understand why I play music, she said softly. Because of your grandpa? Her mom asked. Not just that. Because I don't want other people to decide who I am. And her mother smiled, not saying a word, but in her eyes was a quiet pride, like the very music Lani once played. Not loud, not showy, but true in every note. On Monday morning, the sky over West Haven, Indiana, was a dull gray. Puddles from the weekend rain still marked the walkways leading to school. No one said out loud, but deep down, something had changed. Lani Carter, 13 years old, walked to the gates of Rivergate Middle School just like any other day. Simple hoodie, backpack slung low, and her old violin tucked under one arm. There were no spotlights, no applause, but the way people looked at her had changed. No longer curious or pitying, but with recognition. Not because she had gone viral, but because, if only for a moment, they had truly listened. In the cafeteria, Marcus, the younger classmate who played piano, gently slid a chocolate milk carton toward her. She gave a small nod in place of a thank you. No one talked about the talent show anymore. They didn't need to. Everything had already been said in that piece of music. In language arts class, Ms. Monroe walked over to Lani's desk and quietly placed a small printed page in front of her. It was her essay, selected to be published in the school paper. No photo, no flashy headline, just a simple title. Silence doesn't mean invisible. And beneath it, her name, Lani Carter, grade 7B. During recess, a few classmates passed by and gave her a subtle nod, not to prove they had changed, just to let her know they had looked again. Lani didn't laugh. She never did, but she smiled just slightly, a small curve of her lips that softened the cold morning. That afternoon, when she got home to their tiny third-floor apartment, she saw her mother placing flowers in an old plastic bottle by the window. Ryan, her little brother, was scribbling on the wall with colored pencils. "Are you famous now?" he asked, his voice low and full of hope. Lani shook her head and set her violin down on the chair. "No, but people listened." Ryan nodded solemnly. "That's good enough." That night, Lani didn't play her violin. She lay flat on the floor, staring at the faint cracks in the ceiling and thinking of her grandfather, the one who taught her that music isn't meant to earn praise. It's meant to make people remember you, even when you're no longer there to explain anything. No one talked about medals. There was no grand stage waiting. But Lani knew without question she had won, on her own terms. Because sometimes you don't have to shout to prove you're strong. You just have to stand your ground, play your music, and let your actions speak for you.